Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to episode 16 of the Music Mind podcast. Today my special guest is Los Angeles-based trombone specialist Alan Kaplan. Alan has played on more than 1,000 movie soundtracks. He's played and recorded with some of the best musicians in the world, including jazz legends Buddy Rich and Harry James, and the great Sir Paul McCartney. You'll learn about that and a whole lot more in this fascinating conversation with Alan. Today, the internet gods weren't on our side in the last 10 minutes or so of the recording. The audio is a little bit flaky on the Los Angeles end, but you can hear and understand what Alan is saying, and trust me, it's worth hearing this man's thoughts on music after a career spanning more than half a century. Please enjoy my conversation with Alan Kaplan. Well, hi, Alan, and welcome to the Music Mind podcast. It's a real thrill to have you here as my special guest today for episode 16 in the series.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to be here.
Our audience have just seen and heard a fantastic version of the Beatles' Norwegian Wood, filmed on BBC TV way back in 1973. And you get to do a great trombone solo there with the Buddy Rich Band. That's 50 years ago, Alan. What's your memory of, do you have any memory of actually playing that solo, or what's your memory of that?
Yeah, I really do because it was even though I was playing it every night on the job, knowing it was on a television show, that early in my life was pretty nerve-wracking. So I remember it pretty well.
There's so many things about that I think we can all learn. Firstly, you're playing with one of the all-time legends, certainly of the drums, Buddy Rich. Love him or hate him. I mean, he's a guy that I think you could genuinely say extended what could be done on his instrument. Now, I think
Absolutely.
I think Buddy was I just did a bit of Google search. And I think he would have been 56 years old when that was filmed. And you guys, the rest of the band, and you can help me with this, look about at least half his age. Were you guys in your early 20s or mid 20s?
Yeah, I mean, I was 19 when I joined, so I was 20 when that tape was made. And the oldest I think we had in the band was somebody named Joe Romano, was a wonderful saxophone player. And I think Joe at that time might have been 32 or 33.
Wow.
Everybody else in the band was in their 20s,
So I
you know.
suppose from the music mind perspective, do you remember what did it feel like? Did it feel like you were playing for the stern old schoolmaster at school, was age not a factor? Were you aware that Buddy was, more than twice your age, and did that in any way influence how you felt playing in that band, or was age irrelevant?
Oh no, age was very relevant. I mean, I was well aware of Buddy, his age, and I was so young that I was kind of amazed that somebody at that age could still play so well. In my naivety, I thought
Yeah,
56 is really old,
yeah.
but I was so aware of his stature, his greatness, and it turns out that the Buddy Rich Band was my absolute favorite band listening to in school. I had dreams about playing on that band. It was
Wow.
really serendipity for me to get called to play with Buddy of all the touring big bands.
I'm just thinking now at 20, to be able to stand up there on live TV surrounded, well, that's one thing I did want to ask you too. The layout of that, the recording is excellent, but it appeared
Hmm.
to me that the saxes and the trombones were behind Buddy. Is that were you
Yeah,
actually? Yeah, and the trumpets were sort of a little bit to his right, I think. But so
right.
yeah. So how do you deal with that? Because it can't possibly have been an ideal acoustic sound you were hearing at the time.
No, it wasn't ideal, and we didn't have any headphones to go with. We just, that was unusual, but that was just the staging that they wanted on the Parkinson show.
Yeah.
That was probably my first time ever being on a bandstand setup like that.
Yes.
But we just went with it, but I'm going to tell you, Buddy was so strong and he literally played every note with you.
Oh,
I remember when I joined the band, I was said, don't worry about the phrasing. Buddy's going to play every note with you because somehow he had 10 arms and Buddy, every single note, whatever your figure was covered on the drums. So it made it in a lot of ways easy to play.
Buddy had that look about him as if, get out of my way. I'm playing the drums here. Like I'm just going to run over you. Do not do anything to get in my way.
Yeah.
But the magic bit in that whole clip for me is right at the end when all the brass are silent and it drops back to just the guitarist playing with a lovely warm sound. And if you listen to Buddy's groove behind that, when it's just really quiet, I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah.
you must have so many nights just marveled at like the loud stuff and the fast stuff. Yes, you just stand back and shake your head.
Absolutely. And I had lived, I rented a room in the back of a house of a guy named Freddie Gruber, who was one of the really top drum teachers here in Los Angeles, who was an acolyte of Buddy Rich. So he
Yes,
was teaching all his students. So we'd have conversations galore about Buddy Rich long before I ever joined the band. So
yes,
with that knowledge in front, I'm sitting next to Buddy. My first year, I was playing second trombone, so I
yes.
was sitting right next to Buddy, and I'm watching that left hand.
Oh,
And it was amazing to see what he did. But the thing that I don't know if we would sometimes on some of the longer gigs, Buddy would rest the band by doing something just with the trio, and he would play brushes.
oh yes.
And Brian, his brush work was unbelievable.
I'm so
Unbelievable.
glad you brought that up, Alan, because I don't know whether I heard or read an interview with Ray Brown, the late great acoustic bass player.
Sure.
And the interviewer said to Ray, look, you've played with everyone. Who's your favorite drummer that you've played with? And he just instantly said, Buddy Rich. But he said, not the Buddy Rich you might be thinking of, the big, loud, driving the big band. He actually said, when Buddy's on brushes, he was the grooviest, most sensitive drummer he had ever played with. Ray Brown. Isn't
I
that
never
incredible?
heard that, but I'm not surprised because it really was something special to hear him play
Oh,
brushes.
mate, and you're playing. I'm still a bit fascinated. You're playing there when you stand up as a 20-year-old. Like, there's obviously reading music and there's improvisation. In that chart, you said you'd played that chart many times with the band. That Norwegian Wood. That the band was quite familiar with that chart, I
Nightly,
assume.
yeah,
Nightly, yeah.
that was one of our nightly tunes. Yeah.
So my first question there is, obviously there is a written arrangement, but did you and the guys largely get to the point where you just knew that? Were you reading those parts, or was it memorized?
We didn't try to memorize. You don't dare make a mistake on Buddy Rich's band. Let me tell you that right now.
Okay,
You
okay,
don't dare. So I don't think any of us, would dare close our eyes and try to play it from memory
okay.
for fear of making a mistake.
But when you stand up and do that solo, now you're doing a solo nightly. Do you have the freedom to play whatever you want to, or is there almost an expectation? I don't know whether that song was recorded in that arrangement. Was there any expectation as an improviser to sort of keep a similar type solo, or was it free reign?
No, not with Buddy Rich. Everybody who improvised was free to play whatever they wanted to play. I
Right.
mean, if he didn't like the style, I mean, we've had some saxophone players that got a little bit too avant-garde, and he wouldn't like that.
No.
But
Okay. Yeah.
if you're just playing a solo, no, there were never. My experience with Harry James was a little bit different. I came
Okay.
on Harry's band after I'd been with Buddy, and I started improvising a different solo on whatever tunes I had solos. And each night I would change it,
Yes.
and I was pulled aside by someone who said, Harry wants you to find a solo and stick with it.
Ah.
So it was different on Harry James's band.
We'll put some photos up as we're speaking. There's a wonderful
Okay.
photo of you on the Harry James band off your website,
Hmm.
standing up and playing a solo. And Harry's very close to you, and by all accounts, really digging your solo. So I do want to talk a little bit about Harry James, because there's another absolute legend of his instrument, not only of his
Right,
instrument, but
right.
both Buddy and Harry James are just legendary names in music. What was it like to hear one of the legends of the trumpet live? Tell me a bit about Harry James. What was that like?
Yeah. It, it was great. Unfortunately, because Harry's most famous years were already past and we were relegated to doing mostly dance jobs,
Yes.
he wasn't terribly inspired. And, he would pretty much play almost the same solos every night. And
Okay.
I wish I could have heard him more. He was standing in front of the band. So I didn't get to really hear what he was playing a lot of times.
Okay.
But there were a couple times we did do some rehearsals and he would come back and play the lead trumpet part to show the guy how it should sound.
Wow.
And it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And on certain nights when Harry was inspired and wouldn't just play his stock solo that he'd gotten, and he would just blow,
Let it
it
go.
was
Yeah.
unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
he was 57 when I joined the band,
Okay.
and he was still playing great. He really was. He'd pop out some double C's once in a while if he really felt inspired. Turn around to the trumpet and say, "See."
That's interesting, because I think it's in his book, Trumpet Blues, or the book that someone wrote about the life of
Yes,
Harry
I know
James.
that book. Yeah.
Yeah. And someone asked him, I think it's in that book, Harry, how much air do you push through the trumpet? And Harry's response was, as little as possible. And when you hear that gorgeous big sound, you would get the impression that he's potentially blowing his head off to get that sound, but he
Mhm.
was genuine. Can we
Thank you.
talk a little bit about efficiency and what your experience has been? I suppose starting by watching Harry play, was your perception that was he working hard, or was he just quite casual about it?
No, I don't believe he was working hard to produce the tone. One of the things that I learned as a student and what I teach in my master classes and private lessons is how to get the most efficiency. Because if your chops are vibrating to the most efficiency, which takes work in a certain way, certain exercises, certain goals, you will get the most resonance and the most sound with the least amount of air. And it
Yeah.
allows everything else to be easier. The technique, all the fast things, that's also easier when you have an efficient setup. So Harry had one of the best set of chops in
Oh,
the history of the instrument, no
yes.
question about it.
Yeah.
And so it's true. It was as easy for him as it looked. I mean,
Yeah.
tremendous work went into developing that when he was a young
Oh,
man. I mean,
absolutely.
Harry, he was a virtuoso.
Yes. From my reading of it, he grew up, his dad was a bandmaster in a circus band or something.
Correct. Harry was playing, so he was playing all day long. He could play Carnival of Venice with his fingers underneath the valves, pushing up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's wonderful. I just want to go back to reading music versus improvising.
Hmm.
Now, at a very young age, 19, you're reading some complex charts,
Yes.
Buddy, from my memory of listening to the Buddy Rich band, he wasn't scared to have, some difficult charts if they sounded good and to test the band and I guess to test himself. How
Right.
did you, what's your history? I understand you and me share a couple of things in common. That I read where the first sound you heard that you liked was a steel guitar. Was it a neighbor or something playing a steel? Or tell us that story.
Yes, it was a friend of mine who lived down the street and he had a steel guitar, and I had never seen anyone really playing an instrument up close. I mean, I was
Yes,
very young at this time.
yes, yeah,
And I was, I think, 7 years old. I thought,
yeah,
God, that looks fun. So
yeah,
I told my mom I would love to play. And I saw that what really inspired me about music was going to a concert at my elementary school
yes.
and seeing a concert of the school band.
Okay,
And it was kind of moving to me. And I
yeah,
thought, gee, I'd like to play an instrument. And my friend down the street had steel guitar. So I mentioned that I'd like to do that. But I was talked out of it when someone said, well, they don't have steel guitar in the band.
yeah,
So I
okay,
said, okay, then let's go on to something else.
yeah. And I just, sitting behind me, I've got a 12-string pedal steel guitar there.
Oh, you do.
Steel guitar's
Yeah.
been part of my life. So it's interesting. We've had
Oh,
that little connection.
uh-huh.
The
Yeah,
it's I
yeah.
never saw anyone play it, but I'll share this with you because you probably played on some of those early Monkeys TV soundtracks. Were you involved in any way with the
No,
Monkeys?
that's a little before my
A
time.
little
A
before.
little
Okay.
before my studio
Okay.
time.
So
Yeah.
over here as a very young kid watching black and white TV in
Hmm.
Australia, I'd come home from school and I'd be watching the Monkeys every afternoon. And one time they played Listen to the Band by the Monkeys.
Mm.
And I'm here, I'm thinking, geez, oh my God, is that a guitar? What's going on in the background? I like that sound.
Yeah.
Many years later, I found out it was the great Lloyd Green from Nashville playing pedal steel. I heard a
Yeah.
sound that I liked, but I couldn't work out what that instrument. I thought, is that a guitar? So it's
Yeah.
interesting that you also heard that sound and was attracted. You
Right,
saw
right.
someone, and it's
I liked
funny,
it.
yeah. And
I liked it, but I couldn't play it in the band,
in a roundabout way, the trombone is in some ways the brass equivalent of a steel guitar because you've got
That's
that
right.
beautiful the
That's right.
legato slide capacity. What attracted you to the trombone? Why the
Well, it
trombone?
actually it looked like fun to me. I couldn't say it was the comedic thing. I hadn't listened to a lot of trombone. I just wanted to pick something to play. And as
Yes,
soon as I made that choice, my father got me some Tommy Dorsey records, a Kai Winding album. And then because of my father's influence, I started listening to Tommy Dorsey play ballads. So ballad trombone playing was kind of in my head as that's the goal.
yeah,
And my first trombone teacher didn't play trombone. He was a multi-instrumentalist,
yes,
but trombone was one he didn't play. So, but he got me reading music very quickly. So I was sight reading
ah,
quite early.
yes,
However, technically I was playing with my armature wasn't great, and the equipment I was playing on
yep,
that I was able to fix later on. But he got
yep,
me going. Even tried to get me to improvise, but I couldn't quite get it the way because we didn't have accompaniment. He was just
on
telling me,
his
"Don't
own,
play what's written," and I go, "What do you mean, don't play what's written? What do I
yeah.
play?" You know.
So take me through the journey because here we are. We've just seen, you're 20 years old. You're taking a killer improvised solo. You're reading the charts with one of the greatest musicians ever, Buddy Rich. And I just want to ask you a question there. My understanding is Buddy Rich didn't read music. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
That's correct. That's what was interesting to me because when we did have rehearsals for new music, which wasn't very often because we were
Yep.
on the road,
Mm.
he would either play and just kind of keep time and listen to what was going, or sometimes he'd have a drummer come in to do the rehearsal with us. Then he
Okay.
would sit and listen.
Yeah.
And either way, if he was sitting about the third time through, he'd have it.
You'd have.
Okay. And the funny thing is, we played some charts after I had been on the band over a year, and we played some things that I had never played. So I know it had been over a year since Buddy had played these,
Yeah.
and he was perfect. So his memory was not only fast,
Yeah.
it was just
Photographic, sort of
incredible.
photographic
Yeah,
memory, a
photographic.
genuine
So
photograph.
he would not forget. Once he learned, it would, like I say, it would take 2 or 3 times. It wasn't
Yeah.
like
No,
he would have it memorized right away,
no.
but it wouldn't take him long, 2, 3 times through, and then he would never forget it. That was astonishing to me.
That's like genius, isn't it? That's
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
how you describe it, but
Oh yeah.
that's
You
beyond
know,
good.
that's savant type stuff right
Oh.
there.
Tell me about learning to read music. You're saying your first teacher saying, here's this and try and not play that and do that. How did you get so quickly that standard of excellence to be able to sit in with one of the best bands in the world and just read those charts? What was your
Well,
process?
I was playing as soon as I was able. I was playing in all the school bands I could, the elementary school band and orchestra. And then in high school, we had actually what high school was what really did it for me because we had an award-winning jazz band. We even won what's called Battle of the Bands that they had at the Hollywood Bowl
Wow.
for high schools in the
Yeah.
whole greater Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
And because my band director loved the Buddy Rich band, he had
Ah,
gotten hold of the charts that were available from Buddy Rich. And Wood was one of them. I've got a recording of me playing Norwegian Wood when I'm 16 on my high school band. So I was a huge fan of the band. But so after playing in all these bands, like in high school and then in college, I not only played in the band and wind ensemble and orchestra in the college that I attended, I was talked into registering for classes so I could play in a different college band, which rehearsed on different days. So I went to Los Angeles Valley College, but I
yes.
also took classes at Los Angeles City College, which had a wonderful band director who had produced many great jazz players. And I was playing in that band 2 days a week, which had a lot of Bob Florence arrangements because
Yes.
Bob was a former student there. And
Okay.
then on Monday nights, there was a junior Stan Kenton Neophonic band starting,
Yes.
and it was Monday night, so I auditioned for and got in that. So I'm doing Monday nights and 5 rehearsals a week with the other colleges. So I'm playing a
A
lot.
lot. Okay.
Yeah,
And that's the answer. The answer is
that's it.
you got good at reading by just doing it as often
Doing
as you
it.
could with the best players that you could do at that time.
Right. There were pros that had come back and played in these bands. Like that's how
Oh,
I got on Buddy Rich's band. The lead trumpet player in our college band had just left Buddy Rich. His name was John Madrid. He was playing lead trumpet with Buddy.
yes.
And when they called him asking about if he could recommend a trombone player from the West Coast because the band was coming out to the West Coast,
Yes.
he recommended me. So it was
Mate,
all, like I
that's
said, serendipity for
serendipity.
that to happen.
Yeah. It's being in the right place at the right time, but being totally prepared for that opportunity because you'd worked so hard. Did you feel confident when, hello, I've got a chance with Buddy Rich? Did you was it like, here we go? Or was there any doubt in your mind that you were up to that? Or were you very confident, here we go?
Oh, oh, I was nervous, but I knew that I could read. I just didn't know how he was going to,
Ah, yeah,
accept what I did.
yes. Now the improvisation side. A similar story was it that in all of those college bands you got a chance to start improvising? How did that develop? How did you get to improvise at a young age?
But yeah, I was actually a little slow with improvising. My particular story is I was mostly playing lead, and I was naive enough to think back then that, well, if you play lead, you don't have to be a jazz player, you have to improvise. Because in
Okay.
school, it's a little more naive. Yeah, this is the solo chair, this is the lead chair.
Okay.
In reality, that's not the case.
Mm.
And the way my improvising started when I was actually working with what we call a top 40, a rock and roll band that
Yeah.
played pop rock and roll things. And I
Yes.
was learning to improvise on those things, but they were mostly 1 or 2 chords. So it was easier for me to just learn to improvise on. And that's where I really got started. But when I got called to go with Buddy, I hadn't been improvising a lot. So I actually on the solo, when I saw which tunes I had to play solos on, I kind of worked some stuff out in practice
Yes.
in my room in my hotel room
Yes.
and worked things out, but I worked out something different every day so that it would sound like I'm improvising.
Okay.
This is the God's honest truth, and it's,
Yeah, the secrets.
I'm
Yeah.
not ashamed.
No,
And
that's a logical approach, as opposed to just standing up, closing your eyes and hoping for the best, because you wouldn't want to,
exactly.
yeah, you wouldn't want to
With
try
Buddy
that.
Rich, you don't dare do
No,
that. So I was
no.
practicing and learning theory and as much as I could, but also working things out that I knew I could call on. But eventually you develop this jazz vocabulary. You can start drawing from what you've already played and learn and pretty much assemble the ideas that you've worked out. And that's
Yeah.
really my jazz playing was totally from that hard work and practice.
I want to switch to classical music now, because
Okay.
a lot of your life, and I want to get into the studio stuff, but a lot of your life beyond those touring band years, I imagine, has involved playing in a classical style, at
Hmm.
least in
Yeah.
those wonderful studio orchestras. And I actually want to play. You've got a beautiful clip on your YouTube channel where you
Hmm.
multi-track, I think, 7 trombones, and it's part of your Hoyt's Garage album
Uh-huh.
project. The track I want to play is Tchaikovsky's Symphony Number 4. I think it's the third.
Yes.
Look, we might just play it first, and then we'll let our audience listen and watch you play that. It's gorgeous. Okay, Alan, marvelous playing there, and what an innovative clip where you're standing there playing all of those trombones, and the sound is gorgeous. Can you tell us first a little bit about making that video and the recording, the multi-tracking process? What parts did you start with? Just talk a bit about how you created that beautiful video.
Yeah, well, the video itself was later. I did the
Yeah,
album first, and then
yes,
I decided to make a video to post it. So the
yes.
recording, the way Hoyt Bohannon arranged those things, this was mostly just for practice, for performance at his house where the rehearsals were. So the first part is moving from place to place. So there is not one consistent first trombone part to lay down, one consistent second trombone. Same with the
Oh,
basses. There's two basses on some of them. I think, yeah, and so they one's the bottom and then it switches to the top. So I would just whatever part had the most, the most measures I would lay down first,
okay.
whichever it was. Even though well, first of all, I would pre-program a tempo map with click tracks because nothing's going to work when you're multiplying it yourself that much without a
No.
perfect click track.
Yeah.
So setting the correct tempos for all the rubato and all that is very difficult. So that's first. And then I would lay down one of the parts that seemed to have the most. And I would just go from there, whichever seemed closest to it to do next, you know. And that's basically what we did,
It's
what I
it's
did.
it's
And we just
beautiful. It's beautiful playing. And I think you obviously also played different instruments, tenor trombone, the bass trombone, and what have you, which adds to that character. So just talk a little bit about, I understand the Hoyt's Garage was a bit of an institution in Hollywood. Can you tell us just a little bit about that era, what that was that you've now
Mhm.
recreated in recordings? But what's the background of the actual concept?
Well, the whole group started back when there were staff studio orchestras in Los Angeles. And people had their job. It was great. They had security and a guaranteed salary, but they didn't often play. Sometimes they'd go in and a movie didn't even call for brass, or if it did, it was minimal. And sometimes they'd say like, I don't even have chops. So Hoyt got the idea to start. Originally, he started by transcribing some of the great film cues they would be playing on. He was
Okay.
on staff at Warner Brothers, and there was Max Steiner, Eric Korngold,
Mm.
some of the great on and on,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
some of the greatest composers. And if he liked the piece, he would ask, can I get a copy of the conductor's sketch usually? So they'd give it to him and then he would transcribe it for trombones. He
Okay.
got enough of them done that they started a group just to play to keep their chops up. And that's why it was divvied up the hard parts. It would be flute solos and violin parts. So very unrealistically
On the
written for
trombone.
trombone, but it
Yeah.
was just for the challenge of it. And all
Okay.
the great players throughout years would play at Hoyt's. I knew about Hoyt's when I was a student.
Yeah.
So when I met him, he subbed on Harry James's band, and I met him.
Ah.
And he heard me play all the things that I had with Harry's band, lots of solos. He invited me to play in the group, and that was a thrill. And
What
that
an
was
honor. What an
1975.
honor too. Like given that
Yeah,
history. Yeah.
it was. And then I walk into the room, and there are these
Mm.
heroes of mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the approach style, and it spread on to more classical pieces like this
Mm.
Tchaikovsky. And also, he was a fan of the High Lows and Singers Unlimited, Hoyt, so he would
Yes.
transcribe those for trombones.
Yes.
But the theory there was rather than sound symphonic with using the bigger trombones, it was what he called studio legit. The
Yes.
kind of vibrato that was used for the solos that would show up on television
O-
shows and movies.
Okay. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
had its own particular niche, which I
Yes.
loved.
And so for people interested in, you've recorded two albums, I think, have you? Are you playing all the trombones on both of those albums?
Both of them is just me right here in
Wow.
the in
What a
this
lot
setup,
of
like
work. But
you
yeah,
have
yeah, that's right. Like
there.
I've got, yeah, what a wonderful project. And you've captured some stuff for prosperity there for the whole world because I imagine most of those original players have passed on and it's music that was magic in a home environment. It's interesting how you were saying that it started as a not a commercial thing. It was just where people could let off a bit of steam and and
Right.
and, and keep their chops together.
Totally. And actually, the reason I ended up doing it all myself, by that point, this is 2012, by attrition, there was many players either moved away or
Yeah.
unfortunately passed away.
Yes.
So from the original players that were playing in the group, it was like, well, it's going to be hard to get people together and it's very difficult music. The studio time could add up just to get it
Oh,
flawless. So I thought,
yeah, yeah.
why don't I just do it myself? It's my own time.
Yes.
And in honor of the arrangements, I'll make sure that it's clam free,
I
basically.
mean,
So
congratulations on that. I think that's a wonderful contribution to recorded music. I think it's a wonderful project, Alan,
thank
and
you very much. I appreciate
congratulations.
that.
want to move back to your jazz playing. We've got a
Mhm.
wonderful clip here of you playing with Carl Fontana, who is he's passed away sadly now, but was
Yes.
absolutely one of the. Can you, for people who don't know about Carl Fontana, can you just talk a little bit about his history? He was obviously well respected as a jazz trombonist. Tell us a bit about
W-
Carl.
Well, Carl, originally from New Orleans, but he came up at the youngest age was with the Stan Kenton band, Cuban Fire, and many other albums. Carl became well known from that, and he developed a style all his own. The doodle tonguing, number one, that was a technique of tonguing that nobody else, as far as I know, had done.
Mm,
And he just had this unique approach to playing with incredible facility and very fast, although he never sacrificed swing or musicality or anything else in efforts to play fast. It's just something he could develop. He was as fast as any saxophone player you could name
yeah,
on trombone, and his time was impeccable. And he was in New York for a long time. I
right.
knew about him when he was still in New York, but later he settled in Las Vegas. He lived in Las Vegas for the rest of his life. And I got to know Carl. I worked with Paul Anka a few
Yes.
times, and he was his first trombone player. So I got to sit next to Carl, which was an absolute joy,
Oh,
you know.
so
And so,
Carl played professionally in the bands in Las Vegas, was it? Is that how
right,
he?
that's what he
Yeah,
would tour, he'd go out and, take
yeah.
off and go do whatever jazz things he was doing because he
Yeah.
was a very prominent jazz star.
I want to let our audience see you're just standing right beside Carl here, playing,
Mhm.
sharing a complicated, fast jazz head on trombone, and then you take individual solos. The clip is available on your YouTube channel. You've got a great band behind you. It's live somewhere. Do you remember this one where the two of you are out front of a good band and
Oh,
you
I remember that vividly. It
tell us a
was a
bit
club
about that? Yeah.
it was a club in Studio City called the Moonlight Tango. And it was a place where every Monday night was big band night because
Okay.
they had various other entertainment throughout the week. So all the big bands played there, and this one particular band was led by a trumpeter named Louise Behringer, and she asked Carl if he would like to come in to play with the band.
Yes.
And and then when he agreed, and he was featured on some other things that night, but
Yes.
she asked me would I like to do that one particular tune up front with Carl. And I said,
Yeah.
absolutely. And like I said, I knew Carl well. He had stayed at my
Yeah.
house a couple
Okay.
times when he was in LA to work a jazz job. So
Okay.
we were
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
I mean, of
No.
course I'm intimidated because he's the greatest in the world,
Oh,
but he was the nicest man in the world too.
oh.
So
Let's
so
have a
that's
look.
how that came about.
Let's have a look and a listen. And this is wonderful jazz playing. Really great. Two fantastic trombonists here.
Oh, thank you.
Alan, that's amazing. And it's interesting how you said at the start the different styles. What I picked up there, you and Carl are playing ferociously, really stretching the limits of what you can do on a trombone. But it's very different styles. Like you said, Carl's slide work seems very smooth, and yours is very determined and precise. Is that something you obviously noticed between, you've got very different styles of playing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
He
yet the
was
results,
effortless. He, like you say,
yeah.
he floated.
It
It
looked like he
floated.
was just sliding, and you listen to the notes coming out and you're thinking, it's like Charlie Parker on Heath there, and yet he looks like he's just going for a little walk in the park. So I want to throw up a couple of photos now. I suppose a musician that's been special to me, I've never had the chance to meet this guy, Doc Severinsen, the famous trumpet player, mainly known from his 30 years with The Tonight Show. But I come into contact with the sound of Doc Severinsen before I ever picked up a note. Over here in Australia, there was an era, it was sort of the high fidelity era, where the music shops would be trying to sell expensive turntables and sound systems. And there was an era where the Command records, the Command label records, were relatively available here in Australia. So you'd have Henry Mancini with strings, you'd have Doc Severinsen, and all these names, I'm thinking, who are these guys? But a guy lived over the road from where I am now. I'm in the original family home here, and less than 50 or 60 metres across the road was a fireman, a professional fireman, who was an amateur alto saxophonist. On his stereo, he had, out on the porch, he had the loudest stereo. I'm a kid, but even to this day, I've been to some big rock concerts now, this guy had this stereo up so loud, and he was playing on high repeat Doc Severinsen's Tempestuous Trumpet album.
I was going to say Tempestuous Trumpet. I'm sure that's what it is.
And mate, my brother, who's 4 years older than me, and we both became musicians, we just looked at each other as if it was unspoken. But what we were saying is, whoever's doing that absolutely knows what they're doing. We didn't even really realize it was a trumpet or in the background that orchestra. But many years later, I actually, when I got interested in music, I bought that record. It's still my favorite record to this day. And what I only learnt relatively recently, and now I can hear it, is Doc's the only trumpet player on that album. It's a bank of trombones that you hear, led by Irby Green, who I also want to talk to you about. But we've got a photo of you with Doc, and can you just tell us a little bit about, I suppose, your association with Doc Severinsen?
All right. Well, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with Doc Severinsen. Early on, when he was doing the Tonight Show, I would sub once in a while on the show.
Yes.
And did sub with his small band. He had a band called Zebron that he would tour with, and I sub on that small group a couple of times. But back then, you couldn't really have much of a conversation with Doc. If he asked you a question while you're answering and he's playing at you, Doc never put the horn down. Which is why into his 90s, he's still playing great. He's not touring now, but he's probably still practicing. Knowing him, he's probably still practicing.
Yeah.
But we never really got to talk. So the picture that you're referring to was from about 5 or 6 years ago at rehearsal for a concert we did at the Hollywood Bowl.
Wow.
And Doc led this band, and I was the featured trombone player, and he was now available for conversations, and we talked about a lot of things. He couldn't have been nicer, and it was so great to actually be able to communicate with him. So we had a really nice time, and he was early 90s.
Yes.
I think he was actually 90 when we did that job.
Oh,
and
in good nick.
Fantastic.
In good nick for 90. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the magic of Doc Severinsen, that sound, again, from your perspective, I think you've answered it. That when you were trying to have a yarn to him, he's still got it on his face.
He never stopped playing.
Never stopped playing.
And you know who his idol was? Who was the best trumpet player?
Harry James.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's that lineage,
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Irby Green. I found Irby Green through that same process. I didn't know he was playing on those Doc Severinsen records, but eventually some of Herbie's records would appear in the local music shops, those Project One records or B and Green and 21 Trombones. I'd buy that and take that home and think, this guy's the Doc Severinsen of the trombone. He's got this gorgeous sound and facility. Have you got any memories of discovering Herbie Green in your path?
Early on in school, in college, I was exposed to Herbie Green from teacher and friends,
Yes.
other trombone players, and we would listen incessantly. And by the way, there's one called the Sixtet album that Doc plays on. Doc is the one trumpet on the album with Herbie Green
With
and Walt
Herbie Green?
Levinsky on reeds.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
going to
the
have to research
Sixtet
that one.
it's called.
Okay.
It's a beautiful album.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's also, I believe it's Command. But
Yeah.
anyway, no, he was amazing. He's still still one of the greatest ever. And he and Carl Fontana did the same thing in terms that they could play very loud, but they chose not to a lot of times when they were playing melodies and improvising.
Yes.
And that was refreshing because I came from the rock and roll days. People were playing loud, and the whole
Yes.
the Kenton experience, people coming out of that kind of thing were all playing loud.
Loud,
But
yeah.
this we kind of call the New York approach. There were other people too. And I
Ah,
thought, this is really interesting. But
yeah.
I'm just the hugest Herbie Green fan.
Oh, it
I
changed.
love Herbie Green. I only met Herbie one time, so I can't say that I knew him personally.
No.
But there was so much efficiency coming out. He could play so softly. He could just whisper through the horn and
Mm.
yet play with all this facility and control. Most of us, if we're not moving a certain amount of air, nothing happens.
Yes.
Herbie could just produce a tone. It was just magnificent. And he created his own thing. Nobody played like Herbie
No.
before.
No.
He created that approach to playing that has been emulated since. Bill
Yeah.
Waters would have told you he learned he would
From that, yeah.
he was someone who got from Herbie and Carl both.
Yes.
That's what you get. You put them together and you get Bill. Of course, Bill went off and did his own thing, not to take anything away from
No.
him.
No. Your ballad playing, it's interesting to hear you talk about the things that caught your ear of how Herbie could play quiet as a mouse, but under total control. You've got some
Right.
beautiful albums that are highlighting, I guess, your ballad playing, but the gorgeous sound of a trombone. You also, the other thing you and I share in common is back in 1999, I was the first Australian player to ever have the honour of an album on Music Minus One. I did a tenor sax
Oh,
album called Sinatra Saxon Swing. And at the time, it was in
ah,
1999, it was direct with Irv Kratker when Irv, it was
Eric
still
Kratka,
when it was
yes.
still the family business. And I smiled when I saw on your site, wow, we're on the other side of the world, grown up differently, but we share that too. And you've got some beautiful Music Minus One albums. Over here, I asked one of the best players in Australia, one of the jazz pioneers. He was a wonderful woodwind player. I said, look, I'm living in a regional town. What's your recommendation for me to get better? And he said, get some Music Minus One records. Practice with some Music Minus One. And it was a bit like you, 15 or 20 years later, I was offered an album on Music Minus. The whole circle had come. I grew up.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. But you've also got, I think, Lonely Town is one album.
Lonely Town, yes.
Yes.
That's how I ended up with Irv Kratka, because he contacted me and said maybe we can make a Music Minus One out of Lonely Town, be able to
Oh,
remove my solo tracks
yes.
because I have the arrangements.
Yes. Okay.
But we found out that that was going to end up being much more difficult. It was done analog on 24 track.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So
it would
not
have
easy.
been
Yeah.
too difficult. But then he said, well, listen, I've got lots of things. I'd love to do albums with you. So that's when we collaborated on the two like Sinatra
Yeah.
arrangement albums and the Mozart album.
And congratulations on those because I think that concept. I know Irv really started that, Irv Kratker,
Mhm.
and it eventually morphed into karaoke. And some people might wish karaoke was never invented, but as an
Yeah.
entertainment medium, what's wrong with it? It's a good idea.
Right.
Someone who can't sing, get up and have a go. But I think for musicians, if I was learning to play the trombone, to hear you play and then have the chance to play with your backing track with the chart you played, it's invaluable. It's a wonderful way to learn in the privacy of your own home. So,
I learned that way too. There were some Music Minus Ones way back that I learned from. Dick
yeah,
Noel had a
well,
great
there
one.
you go. Wow.
Mhm.
I want to
Mhm.
play a video of yours now, and these aren't professional videos. These are sort of shot, obviously, on a camera in the audience. There's a wonderful one you put up just recently on your YouTube of the tune "Too Little Time."
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Tell us a bit about that. It's beautiful playing, lyrical playing. Tell us about that band and that occasion where that's been filmed.
Okay, that band is called the West Coast Jazz Hour Band. And what it is during the pandemic, these two wonderful guys, Josh Nelson on piano and Kevin Van Den Elzen, the drummer, would have a weekly show on Facebook, and they would have interviews just like this. They would do podcast type interviews.
Okay.
And so I did one with them, and we covered the same kind of thing we are now. And they went
Yes.
through so many wonderful people
Yes.
throughout the whole pandemic. And then once that came to an end, they decided to start a band, and they got a lot of us who had been interviewed on their show. Gene Cipriano, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he played in the band when it first started,
Yes.
and many great other players. And so, and what they do is it's a historic. They go through and they find some Shorty Rogers arrangements that haven't been played in a long time, lots of Mancini classics,
Yes.
Bob Florence things. They're constantly finding treasures to bring back and play live.
Oh.
So that's what they do. And this Too Little Time was made famous originally for Murray McCackern on the Glenn Miller story, but then Dick Nash did the consummate recording with Hank Mancini. So this is
Okay.
the Hank Mancini arrangement that Dick Nash had recorded.
Let's have a look and listen to Too Little Time. Okay, Alan, we've got a photo up of you with some of the great Los Angeles players, but you're surrounding, in fact, you are absolutely beside one of the all-time icons of pop music. And I think that there will ever be Paul McCartney. Tell us a
Right.
little bit about it. Looks like you have done a session or something there with Paul. What's the background to that photo?
All right. Well, the background was the gentleman who's next to me on the other side of Paul is Michael Giacchino. He's a wonderful film composer. He won an Oscar for the score we did for Up, score that he wrote and we recorded,
Yep.
and many, many other Pixar movies. So it was all I knew is show up at Capitol. It's for Michael Giacchino. Okay. I show up and I like to get to sessions early, and I walk in early and I see this guy playing bass, and it's Paul McCartney with that Hofner bass. He
Off
says,
the Beatle
"Hello, hi
bass.
mate." I said, "Oh, hi mate." And Michael comes up to me grinning from ear to ear. "You didn't know about this, did you?" I said, "No, I didn't."
Oh my
And it couldn't
goodness.
have been nicer. It's a project of Paul's, and on this particular session, we were working on a song that he had written, and it's
Yeah.
going to be part of it. It's an ongoing project that's not even finished as far as I know.
Yeah.
But this one, there was a singer who showed up after we had played through it a few times, Lady Gaga.
Ah.
So Lady Gaga shows up and we record this song.
As a band live
As a band,
together.
there's a rhythm section. Yes,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
rhythm section showed up also.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
the picture you see that I posted is just of us horns
Yes.
who work
Yes.
with Michael. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that was, and then we did another session with Michael with full orchestra with Paul for the same project. And I understand it's still ongoing with different instrumentation. So
Oh.
someday it'll see the light of day. That's about all I know
But
about it.
Alan, what a memory. You're like his right
Yeah.
hand man. You're right there. He seems to be a genuinely nice guy. And there's a guy who's changed the world. Like if you want to pick someone in music, hello,
He
there's
couldn't
no
have
doubt.
been nicer. He was incredibly nice, you
Oh,
know?
I would have loved to have caught your face when you see the bass player. You'd almost be thinking, is this a setup? Is that a look-alike? But I guess there's only one Paul McCartney, and you would have worked out pretty quick that's him.
It's really interesting. And later in my career, I've had these encounters. Like I got a call to do a record date again, same studio at Capitol Records,
Yeah.
and I show up and there's Bob Dylan.
Oh,
And he did what ended up being 3 albums of standards. And they're
yeah.
basically the Sonata arrangements done with his band with steel pedal, steel guitar, and other things.
Great. Yeah.
And we're doing ballads. And I have a ballad solo on the night we called it a day for
But Bob
for
Dylan.
him. How big,
Oh, mate.
how amazing it is that, you know?
Yeah, like I just keep thinking of this young kid, you're 8 years old and you're seeing the guy playing steel and just a bit of interest in music. You go to a concert and you go forward 50 or more years. What an amazing life. And it's
Yeah.
still happening. You're surrounded by your instruments. You've got a great little home studio. It's obvious to me you're not ready to hang up the mouthpiece just yet. I get the impression you're enjoying it too much. Would
Oh
that
yeah.
be a correct statement?
It's exactly correct. I'm having too good a time. I'm still working hard at it to stay on top of it
Yeah.
because it doesn't maintain on its own.
No,
It's too physical.
no.
I practice very hard, and fortunately, I'm still still at it.
For our audience, I strongly recommend that they go to your website, which is alankaplan.org, O-R-G, I believe.
That's
Yeah.
right. Mhm.
On there, one of the fascinating things, you list some, if not all, of the 1,000 or so movie soundtracks you played on. Now, I started looking down the list and recognizing at least 10 that I have enjoyed in a cinema watching the movie. I just want to, again, from the music mind perspective here, because I heard a good podcast with Malcolm McNabb relatively recently. Malcolm's, I think, in his 80s now. And he sort of
Yes.
said that he got to the point where he was a little bit concerned, unlike you, where it's obvious throughout that you have continued to record projects of your own albums and play in live situations. I got the impression from Malcolm that he had genuinely spent his life largely in the studios playing those soundtracks. I think he's done 2,000 or more soundtracks. But when he was thinking of his grandkids, he had a concern in his mind that if someone said, "Oh, hey, Pop, what did you do? What did you do?" He was worried that whilst he could say, "Oh, I played on the Batman movie or something," if you go and watch the Batman movie, and what I was going to say to you is, I've heard you play without knowing you were playing all
Hmm.
my life. But
Yeah.
if someone said, "Oh, did you hear Alan's trombone part there in the back of whatever it was?" My answer would be, "No, it was a great band, but no." So he got to the stage where his impetus to record a few albums was that he had something to leave behind that, hey, I actually can play. I'm not
Right.
just one of that. Can you talk about, I guess, the psychology of being a session musician? You've spent how many years? When did you first move into what you would call, rather than live touring with Harry James and all them, how long ago did you move into, I guess, the realm of the studio player as a career?
Well, I left Harry James in the middle of 1975, and I probably started doing little sessions within a few months, and by 1976, I started doing mainstream, just not not every week, but I
No,
started
no.
doing sessions for
Yeah,
mainstream television
yeah,
shows in 1976. The original
yeah.
Hawaii Five-O was one of the first ones. There was a show called Battlestar Galactica.
I remember it.
So in
Yeah.
1976,
Mm.
I would say that's when I started my career in the studios, and
Yes.
it did take off fairly quickly. It was amazing to me that.
So, as a lifestyle, and people will be interested in this, can you contrast what it felt like to shift your career from a touring band musician to, I guess, a Hollywood studio musician? What did you have to do, I suppose, both mentally and physically to adapt to those very different environments?
Well,
Yeah, talk about that.
one of the first things I had to was be aware of what were the requirements. And I realized very early on, well, I'm not just going to show up and play my regular tenor trombone. I'm going to need to play bass trombone. I'm going to need to play euphonium. And I started working on both of those shortly after I got off the road. And but I didn't want to be seen anywhere playing them until I felt confident enough that I had gotten enough facility. And that was one thing. So all of a sudden now I'm spreading my time working on three instruments.
Yeah,
Now, when actually, and I already had bass trumpet I bought, so I already knew valves. So I've got four instruments instead of basically two that I was working on. So that's one aspect. The
yeah,
other aspect is here I was pounding on big bands, playing loud and high. And in the studio, sometimes you're playing really, really soft
yeah,
because it's like string tremolos and soft brass behind dialogue. So you've got to be able to play softly with the good tone. So that was another challenge that I had to learn quickly.
yes.
That's very different from what the demands of what I had been doing were. And now if people don't double on those, at least tenor and bass trombones, I don't think they're going to have a chance to break into the studios.
Wow, and that's a good discussion point there, because there will be people watching this who would dream of, when they look at those movies and albums and TV scores, people would say, gee, I'd love to do that. But what you're highlighting straight up front is it's a very different beast than playing a shout chorus in a big band live.
Right. You can hear an album that someone's playing great solo. Good. I want to do that. Well, in order to get the opportunity to do that, you've got to be around and able to do all the other things. But
Yes,
now I've expanded to contrabass, trombone, and tuba. I've been playing those instruments for decades now,
yes,
you know, and also symphonic size trombone. We do mostly those trombones when we're working in the studios for movies.
the
So,
sounds, yeah.
you know,
The feeling, I suppose, the psychology of being largely an anonymous player, a bit like, I suppose, a bass player. There's a certain psychology. Someone grows up and they want to be the screaming lead guitarist, the solo. Another person grows up and says, I'm happy to just be in the back there and play the bass.
I think one thing is that you have to be prepared to be anonymous and be just one of the fray.
Yeah.
You know, like the string sections are loaded with people who all wanted to be concert virtuoso soloists. Now they're just part of a bank of strings. We play all together. Only one person can play first at a time. So even if you want to be the first trombone player, if you're hired to play second, and you have to be able to adapt stylistically. The worst thing to be is a very recognizable soloistic type player who can only sound like you wherever you are, because it's not going to call for that every time.
Yes.
When they want you and your style, that's great. But if they
Yes.
don't, you have to be able to, and some people, they need the ego satisfaction too much to just want to be part of the background. It's
That's a
not their
wonderful point.
personality.
I remember reading the great Rafael Mendez eventually lost his job because he was too identifiable.
Yeah,
You know,
Yuan Racy replaced him. This was on staff at the MGM studios, and Yuan
yeah,
said he was unfortunately too recognizable, too
yeah.
stylistic.
It's
You
sad,
know.
isn't it? But of course, he developed his own
Mhm.
standalone career. Okay, we're coming down the home straight here. I want to play a great little clip from a Merv Griffin performance where Merv and a few other guys are singing Pennies from Heaven. You're in the band. And this is a rare moment. This is one of the rare moments for a trombonist, I think, that I've ever seen, where they turn around and they all shout out your name. You get an enormous introduction here to your solo. Do you remember this? This was obviously at a big dance or something, a performance. Do you remember this one?
Yes, I did. I'll tell you the whole story. Originally, see, we were all playing on Merv's 5 day a week, right, talk show.
Yeah.
And it was a house band was a small band. And those singers actually were all the rhythm section of the band, the guitarist, the bassist, everybody but the drummer. They so
Oh.
So Bert got the idea to do this vocal thing. So he pre-recorded the rhythm track and had them come out and sing on the show, on the regular show. And
Yeah.
then they wrote my name into that and I played it. But
Yes.
that was to it pre-recorded.
Yes.
Well, then Merv sold his company. The show went off the air and he decided he wanted to try to have a once a week big variety show. So this
Okay.
was the pilot for what is hoped to be Merv Griffin's Coconut Ballroom show every week, and he'd have guest stars and the big band playing,
Yeah.
and he'd sing. Unfortunately, it never got picked up. But
Okay.
this was from that pilot that I'm lucky to have the tape of.
Oh,
So-
let's have a look and a listen to a little bit from Pennies from Heaven with the loudest introduction I think a trombonist has ever had. It's a great moment.
Trade 'em for a package of sunshine and flowers.
What a begonia.
If you want the things you love, you must have
I
showers.
get pneumonia.
So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me and Alan Kaplan. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven. There'll be dollars on dewdrops. Pennies from heaven for you and me. It's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring.
Yeah, a lot of fun there, Alan. Great solo too. Fantastic. Now, equipment. You're surrounded by some beautiful trombones there. What's your take on finding the right equipment for you as a player? Giving advice to someone, because it seems to me you can spend a life going down the rabbit hole of constantly looking for the magic mouthpiece or the magic horn or the magic whatever it is. Can you talk a little bit about your feeling on equipment and finding the best match for you?
It is a rabbit hole, and I've been down it many times, and I've worked with instrument companies developing models, but I hate it. I love nothing more than finding something good and staying with it so that I'm not dealing with that inconsistency. I can just deal with my own inconsistency. But there's no question about it. All of us players have different requirements for an instrument, the way the resistance is and other characteristics. And it does make a difference to find one that plays the most easier and is an extension of your body. And there's so many variables out there that I don't know where someone would begin. But I
Wow.
started with an instrument. When I was with Harry James, he got the instrument company that he was with to set me up with something.
Okay.
He told them that they should get me with them.
Yeah.
And they gave me a horn that I ended up, it's sitting right here across the room,
Okay.
that I played for 35 years.
Yeah.
And when I've been with other companies since, I've tried to basically build on that,
Yes.
on the basic overall sense of that horn, and maybe make it larger or whatever.
Yes.
So, yeah, but equipment is really, really important. One thing I want to say, sometimes people who double, they don't want to, well, I'll play bass trombone, but I want to use my regular tenor trombone mouthpiece because it's easier. No, it doesn't work.
Doesn't
You're not
work,
going to
no.
get the sound, you're not going to get the
No.
facility. So
Okay.
whatever instrument you play, make it a pro line.
Yes. Yes.
You can't go halfway.
the goal should be to try and find something that works and then work on yourself rather than
Right.
run down all those rabbit
There are
holes.
so many variables in life. You want to eliminate them, not add to them. Right.
Have you got any specific little projects or goals that you're working on that you might want to share with the audience?
Well, I don't know if you noticed it on my YouTube channel. I just put up a Moon River rendition of the Jacob Collier
Yes.
arrangement.
Yes.
I've been so enamored with that unbelievable arrangement and performance that he did with voices, mostly his voices,
Yes.
that I thought I'd like to do that since I can do that at home, something I can
Right.
do in my free time. So I just finished that
Yes.
just for my own pleasure, and I posted
Absolutely.
it just because. And I have a couple other transcriptions of his things that I'm going to be doing in the coming weeks.
Oh,
Just to, because
wonderful.
if I'm not busy working, I want to have a project. I'm only comfortable playing my horns in a recording situation, it seems. So this way I can just do it right here where I'm sitting in front of my computer.
Well and truly inspiring. How long have you been playing the trombone?
I was 8 years old, so that would be 60. What am I? I was 8 years old and I'm 71, so that's 63 years. Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. And I
You
guess
would think I'd have it down by now.
Doc Severinsen has led the way for all of us when we think we're getting a bit old. I think Doc sort of said, you push on till it's time to go is what he's taught all of us.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
no need to have a predetermined date where I'm too old to play.
No, there's no set rule.
No.
You just play until whatever.
To finish on, there's another good video. It's just shot on a phone, but it's from Seth MacFarlane's 2018 Christmas party. For those who might not have heard the name Seth MacFarlane, can you tell me a little bit about Seth?
Well, Seth MacFarlane is responsible for some of the biggest hit adult animated shows. Family Guy, I'm sure a
Yes.
lot of people are familiar with. That's been on the air for 20 years.
Yes.
American Dad. There's a new one on called Ted. The two Ted movies were his.
Yes.
And now we have a new streaming television series based on Ted. And he's also been the star, director, and producer of Orville, which is sort of like a Star Trek, live action Star Trek thing. And on
Okay.
this show, we've done 2 seasons, and I think there will be a third coming. He insists on having a 60-piece orchestra.
It's
And
wonderful.
it's just the music is fabulous. And he
Oh.
started doing these Christmas parties at his house every year. And he wants the same orchestra that does the Orville.
Mate, it's a wonderful orchestra. And there's a feeling, I know it's a Christmas party, but there's a feeling of fun. I love one of the ladies in the front who's one of the violin players.
I know.
She's having the time of her life just grooving to the
I
music.
know.
And
That's
you,
Marissa.
oh, it's wonderful. And you get to stand up and sort of take a lead but then the trombones as a section get to feature on the song Lonesome Road. You've lived life with a smile. You naturally smile even when you're talking. And I just hear in this whole 60-piece band, I mean, I can see some famous names in there, Wayne Bergeron on the trumpet and all that.
Right.
But it is a great orchestra in the spirit of a Christmas party. So we'll go out with Lonesome Road. Thanks so much, Alan, for sharing your time and stories today. It's been fantastic.
Oh, my pleasure, Brian. Thank you for having me.
What a fascinating life Alan has led as a professional musician. There's so much wisdom in his words, and at 71, he's just as excited today to get up and play and record music as he was when he first discovered it at 8 years of age. As always, I invited my guest to join me in a collaboration video. Alan said he'd like to play the jazz standard Just Friends. So please enjoy this duet arrangement of tenor trombone and baritone sax with a great quartet supporting us. Thank you.